The eviction notice was still trembling in Nora Bennett's hand when her world seemed to collapse in on itself. It wasn't just a paper, it was the final blow after months spent balancing overdue bills, double shifts, and the unforgiving weight of raising her 7-year-old son alone in a quiet, aging apartment on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. As she stood in the hallway with her breath caught in her chest, she felt the eyes of the landlord boring through her. Cold, unbothered, ready to move on to the next unit. And right when she thought humiliation couldn't burn any deeper, she noticed the single father and his young son standing behind him, witnessing everything. She didn't know their names yet. She didn't know how much they would soon reshape her life. She only knew she wanted to disappear. If you believe in kindness, compassion, and second chances, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Nora had been struggling long before the letter arrived. After her car broke down and her hours were cut at the diner, she had been barely hanging on. She'd skipped meals, pawned her grandmother's bracelet, and walked miles to save gas. Her son Mason was too young to understand how close they were to losing everything, but old enough to sense that his mother cried when she thought he was asleep. The apartment, though small and worn with thin walls and flickering lights, had been the one place she could try to keep life stable. But the landlord, Mr. Grant, had grown impatient with missed payments, and patience wasn't something he ever had much of to begin with. When he threatened eviction, it wasn't a warning. It was already a challenge delivered with a sneer. What Nora didn't realize at that moment was how intently one of the hallway witnesses, Evan Carter, was watching her. Evan lived 2 doors down, a quiet man in his late 30s who kept mostly to himself. He was raising his 10-year-old son, Lucas, after losing his wife to an unexpected illness 3 years earlier. Evan knew what desperation looked like. He had seen it in the mirror many times, especially in the early years when grief and single parenthood almost swallowed him whole. He recognized the expression on Nora's face, that alarming mixture of fear, shame, and exhaustion that only someone fighting alone could understand deeply. The day moved on, but Evan couldn't shake the image of the trembling paper in Nora's hands. When he knocked later that evening, Nora hesitated before opening the door wide enough to peek out. She expected judgment, maybe pity, but instead she saw something that startled her, a look of genuine concern, a softness that disarmed her defenses. She didn't expect anyone in that hallway to care. In her experience, people rarely did. Evan didn't ask questions at first. He didn't probe into her finances or demand details about her missed payments. Instead, he offered what he had always wished someone had offered him during his darkest days: help without conditions. He mentioned that he had some part-time work available with a small contracting business he ran on the side, mostly paperwork she could do from home. He said he had noticed she hardly ever took time for herself, and that maybe a bit of extra income could give her room to breathe. Nora felt her throat tighten. She had grown used to surviving on her own, but something in Evan's voice felt steady, trustworthy. She found herself accepting before her fear could talk her out of it. Over the next few weeks, Nora's life began to shift in small but significant ways. She learned the systems Evan used for his contracting work, organizing invoices, scheduling projects, and managing communication. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than the diner and didn't require long hours away from Mason. She could work while he did his homework at the kitchen table, both of them sharing the warm glow of the single working lamp. What surprised her most was how Evan checked in, not in a way that felt intrusive, but in the quiet, respectful way someone who understood struggle might approach another wounded soul. He often brought over extra groceries he claimed he accidentally bought too much of. Lucas sometimes invited Mason to play basketball, giving Nora a moment of silence she didn't know she needed. Slowly, the tightness in her chest loosened, yet the landlord hadn't forgotten. Mr. Grant continued to press her for payment, leaving notices and making threats with increasing irritation. Each one made her feel like the ground beneath her was cracking again. Evan noticed her withdrawing, her smile fading back into the familiar mask of worry. Without telling her, he requested a meeting with the landlord. When Mr. Grant smirked and folded his arms, ready to dismiss him, Evan calmly laid out 2 things: proof of Nora's new income, and an offer to co-sign the lease temporarily until she caught up. It wasn't a grand gesture meant to impress her. It was a quiet act of protection from someone who knew how heavy the world could be. When Nora learned what Evan had done, she felt overwhelmed. No one had stood up for her like that before, not even when Mason's father had walked out and left her with the pieces. She tried to confront Evan about it, expecting him to shrug it off, but instead he simply looked at her with a level honesty she wasn't used to. He told her she deserved a break, that she had carried too much for too long, and that sometimes people really did come into our lives not to take something, but to give something back. The stability allowed Nora to breathe again. She caught up on her rent, saved a little, and began rebuilding the confidence she had lost. Mason thrived too, becoming close friends with Lucas, who took on a protective big brother role. The four of them fell into a rhythm, shared dinners, movie nights, afternoons spent in the courtyard while the boys played. Nora found herself smiling again, a real smile, the kind that made her feel alive, rather than weighed down. Evan's presence began to feel like a constant reassurance, something steady in a world that had often felt so treacherous. But life has a way of sending one final test before revealing its blessings. One chilly evening in early November, Nora received another letter from Mr. Grant, this time informing her that the building had been sold and that the new property owners intended to renovate, meaning all tenants would need to vacate within 60 days. The fear she thought she'd finally escaped came crashing back. 60 days felt like 60 seconds to someone who had only just regained her footing. When she told Evan, expecting him to crumble alongside her, he didn't. Instead, he surprised her with something she never imagined. He had been planning to move to a larger rental house nearby to give Lucas more space, and he offered, carefully, without pressure, for her and Mason to move in with them until she found something permanent. He made it clear she owed him nothing, that this wasn't charity but an opportunity for mutual support. Nora was stunned, torn between gratitude and the fear of accepting too much. But when she looked at Mason playing happily with Lucas, and saw how Evan looked at her with patience rather than expectation, something inside her softened. She agreed. The move was emotional, chaotic, and unexpectedly beautiful. They spent long days packing, laughing, sharing meals from takeout containers, and falling into a life that felt strangely natural. The new house was warm, filled with sunlight that poured in through wide windows, and Nora felt, for the first time in years, like she could imagine a future without constant fear attached to it. Evan didn't just help her rebuild her life, he became part of it. Their families blended in the kindest, gentlest way, not through obligation but through genuine connection. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps us bring more uplifting stories to the world. Special request, comment below with the words "kindness still exists" if you believe the world needs more moments like this. And so, what began with an eviction notice and a hallway full of fear transformed into a reminder that sometimes the people who witness our hardest moments are the ones sent to help us rise again. Nora learned that love doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. It often comes quietly, steadily, in the form of a single dad who stepped in before life could knock her down again.